Welcome to 9394, a music podcast with Travis Roy. Good to have you back. You know, since I started this podcast, I have really been fortunate in that I've gotten a lot of support from a lot of friends and family. And one of those supportive people since the moment I announced that I was doing this podcast has been Brandon Callahan. He offered to come on immediately and talk about metal albums, and he'll reach out and be like, hey dude, I'm still interested. I will do all the metal albums, and God bless him. It's much appreciated. And he is definitely one of the best people I could have chosen to do this album because I'm not a huge metal guy. I never have been. There was a moment, as I talk about in this pod, where I was into Pantera, but I was very well out of them by the time that this album, Far Beyond Driven, came out. But not Brandon. Brandon fucking loves Pantera, and he is here to share that love with you. Check it out. I can hear you. Hey.
Awesome. How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's good to hear your voice.
You too.
So how do you and I know one another, Brandon?
Well, we grew up, I'm assuming, for the majority of our adolescent lives in Heartland, Michigan, a little suburb of everywhere pretty much. Hour outside of Detroit, half hour out of Ann Arbor and Flint, so pretty close to everywhere.
Yeah, we were really well located to hit any show growing up, which was cool.
Yeah, I really like that. We were fortunate to, hit the major arenas in Detroit or the small clubs in Flint or, wherever it may be.
Yeah. And your sister, of course, I was friends with since I was in my freshman year. She was one of the first friends I made in high school.
Yep. I know she was class of 97, Heartland.
Yeah.
I don't know what class you were, but you.
I was right behind her.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we had a lot of mutual friends as well. I don't know how much we knew each other in high school, probably by, what year did you graduate?
I was class of 03.
Okay, so we weren't at the same time, I don't think.
Yeah, I remember I was friends with Brian Johnson, one of the Johnson boys, and we'd always be rolling out to Ipsy and hanging out, and there was always something going out there at the time.
Yeah, you still friends with Brian?
Yeah, I still talk to Brian, his best man at his wedding.
Oh, that's great. He's a good dude.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so let's get into Pantera. How did you come to get into this album?
Well, my journey to Pantera, funny enough, starts with Aerosmith.
Okay.
Around 93, 94, that's when, as a young person, I made a choice, I need to get into music. I don't know what spurred it, but I was just I need to start listening to music.
It's the age. It was the age you were in.
Yeah, my sister, she was heavy into music, and my mom was a big musical influence on me too. So randomly, the movie I was watching the most at the time was Wayne's World 2.
Okay.
Which features, as you know, Aerosmith. And I just randomly picked them. I was like, this is my favorite band. Good enough for Wayne and Garth, good enough for young Brandon.
Right on.
So I started with Aerosmith. Around that same time, our family got cable TV, which, of course, gave us a direct line to MTV and VH1, which still played a fair amount of music at the time.
Yeah. And before the internet, getting cable was like having a window into the world finally.
Yes. And ironically enough, Aerosmith was on another weird come up at this time with the Get a Grip album. So they were on MTV too. So I was like, huh. But I also noticed a lot of other bands that a lot of kids my age were also listening to. And I started getting into more heavier stuff like grunge and, Rage Against the Machine had Evil Empire at the time. Well, that was a little bit later. But everything changed in 5th grade for me. And I saw Sean Kletzka with a Metallica Ride the Lightning shirt.
Okay.
And just off the imagery of that shirt alone, I was like, this is my new favorite band.
Yeah, I get it.
The electric chair floating there and the guy in the electric chair on the back that glows in the dark. I was like, I've never heard a song by them. I don't care. This is my band. So Metallica really opened the door for everything heavy to just come flooding in, and like you said, internet wasn't readily available at the time. So you do a lot of digging in like magazines, like Rolling Stone, Hit Parader, Metal Edge magazine, Spin.
All that shit.
Guitar World was big with me too, because I started to get into playing guitar. So eventually you would see Pantera come up multiple times in all these magazines, all these interviews. Dimebag had his own column in Guitar World.
That's right.
That was very influential on a lot of guitar players at the time.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's cool.
So first Pantera album I had was Vulgar Display of Power in 6th grade, and that was it. I was a Pantera fan for life from then. And I got Far Beyond Driven, not too long after that. Probably the next album I'm assuming I got. And I digested those heavy as a young man. Well, as all ages of a man, actually.
Continually, right?
Yeah.
I was kind of like you in that in 5th grade, at like 9 or 10 years old, I was pretty heavy into the metal. I was listening to Metallica. I remember I had Cowboys from Hell on cassette. My brother had Vulgar Display, so I was like able to listen to both those a lot. But by the time this came out a few years later, I was 13, 14. I had not listened to this album in my entire life until the last few weeks. I, of course, was well aware of Pantera and grew up listening to those 2 albums. But it's funny, listening to this album the last few weeks, I was like, man, if this had come out in 91 or 98, when I was more into heavier stuff, I would have been all over it. But I just kind of missed it because it was just in this time frame of my life where it's just really about like indie rock and alternative and not really into the metal stuff. But I'm glad that you wanted to come on the show. I've been kind of hesitant about how much metal and stuff and like how many albums I want to bring on the show that I don't have a personal connection with, But I recognize that this is an important album, and I wanted to talk to you because it'd been a long time. And I was like, okay. And then I started listening to it. I was like, well, shit, this sounds a lot like a lot of stuff that I got into later. Like in the late 90s, I was all about Hatebreed and Coalesce and stuff like that. And I was like, well, those bands were clearly modeling themselves in a lot of ways after not just Pantera, but I feel like even this album specifically.
Yeah, Pantera, they had a pretty big influence on music heading into the mid to late 90s, more than they get credit for a lot. I've heard them be referred to, for better or worse, as like proto new metal. You know what I mean? Like
okay,
heavy double track, like money riffs, kind of aggro. Digitech whammy pedal, which was synonymous in a lot of new metal later on. A Digitech whammy pedal, it's a pitch modulation effect for guitar.
Okay,
and you can hear it's Tom Morello was a huge user of it, but Dimebag Darrell, guitar player for Pantera, adopted the Digitech whammy pedal on this album. You can hear it in Becoming, the ding, 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 like all the high pitch modulation. Like Korn used that a lot. A lot of bands he influenced, for better or worse, with the sound of Pantera. And also this album kind of is a little bit more different than, I would say, Cowboys from Hell or Vulgar Display of Power, as far as like lyrical depth and just like weightiness of subject matter.
And sound too, a little bit, right? Like this feels more. That was actually going to be my next question for you, is someone, because you're like a Pantera fan, I take it. Is this album seen as a turning point in their career? Because it feels like a lot different than when I remember Vulgar Display and Cowboys from Hell being like.
Yeah, Vulgar Display and Cowboys kind of ride off that, Texas Cowboys from Hell, good old boy energy. But with Far Beyond Driven, Phil definitely went more introspective with the lyrics, and it shows he was going through a lot of heavy stuff. And also, like, music wise, this album very groove laden, a lot more groove than the other two, Cowboys and Vulgar, which are a little bit more fast tempoed.
Yeah, that's it right there. This one seems like it can really feel the Jimmy Page influence on Dimebag Darrell coming through on this. I feel like there's a lot more riffage as opposed to just like speed.
Yeah. A lot of riffs, a lot of grooves, and a lot of killer riffing. Like, Dimebag was a huge influence on me as a guitar player. The precise razor sharp riffs that he's just always laying down is barred onto a lot of guitar players.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that he passed early, and I was like, how could they continue without him? Then I looked at who's playing for them now, and Zach Wilde. I'm like, well, okay, I guess I get that.
Yeah, it's a decent replacement.
You can't quite match that, but you can at least be parallel, if not as the same, right?
Yeah, but this album just kind of seems a little bit more mature, too, than the previous two.
Definitely. And also, that gets to your point about Anselmo's lyrics. The lyrics on this surprised me in quite a few places.
Yeah.
The depth of vulnerability and, like, introspection and personal stuff. There's still, like, that heavy, I'm going to kick your ass kind of stuff going on, which is kind of a little eye-rolling to me in a few places.
Agreed.
But I was, like, he dug deep. It's really vulnerable.
A lot of times, especially with metal for me, lyrical content, if it means something or if I can find something in it, cool. Mm-hmm. If not, like as a musician, like what really gets me with the metal is the riffs and the drumming, and
sure,
that's what I look to a lot. But this is the first time going into this for this podcast, sitting down with the lyrics and like actually like digesting them as I'm hearing the song. I was too very surprised at how deep a lot of it was, and not just like braggadocio, chest puffing,
yeah,
which
yeah,
Bill's known for.
Well, yeah, and again, there's definitely some of that on the album, but I think 25 Years stands out as being particularly like, this is like a therapy session. I feel almost uncomfortable with the lyrics in this because it's so like, oh, I'm learning a lot about you in ways, not you, obviously Phil, but I'm learning a lot about Phil in ways that you just don't get, not just from Pantera or like that I thought, but in metal generally, it seems.
Yeah, reading up on this, Phil cites that song specifically as, quote, a love letter to his dad, who he wasn't getting along with at the time.
We're fucking you back is quite a lyric.
We're fucking you back, we're fucking you back. We're fucking you back, we're fucking you back. Criticize, black to red. We're fucking you back, fucking you back. Unwanted, wanted brothers just like you. We're fucking you back, we're fucking you back. We're fucking you back.
So what about for you? Could you name a best song on this album for you?
Well, it's hard to pick. I mean, this album is stacked. A lot of great songs. But favorite, I always go back to the opening track, Strength Beyond Strength.
There's nothing, no education, no family life. To all of us, you say, my job today, get gone tomorrow, be broken up gutter. I know the opinion, a broken record. Fuck you and your college stream, actors were stronger than all. You're working for perfect price, perfect class, perfect name, and some helping to legalize some of your pristine streets. I'm making a fortune. You're muscling gold, naive and gross.
Even though, like you said, it's a lot of chest puffing, Phil, but just the first track off the album I heard. And with our generation-ish, I know when I would get an album, it was kind of an experience. I would sit down with it. First track, press play, let it go. And Strength Beyond Strength, that opening, just like, it just goes into it. And it's got the energy, it's got like a little breakdown, it's got kind of like all the pinpoints of a Pantera song, and it just kind of brings me back to the first time hearing the album, Strength Beyond Strength.
Yeah, it really grabs you right from the get-go and lets you know exactly what you're in store for in the album. And I agree. I felt like, again, like I'm a newbie to this album, so take my opinion with a grain of salt here, but I almost considered it to be my favorite song on the album. But for me, the song that grabbed me the most was Slaughtered, because you could really hear the connection that Dimebag Darrell and what's the drummer's name? Abbott? Dimebag
Darrell and Vinnie Paul brothers. Last name, Abbott brothers.
Okay, yeah, so Vinnie Paul, and you can really hear Vinnie Paul and Dimebag, the way that they grew up playing together. Because a lot of times when you hear the rhythm section, it's the bass and the drums that are really in sync. But like this nonstop chugga, 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 and it's like...
Peace rhythm section.
Oh, it's so tight and it's tough. That's one of the things about like this album. Like driving around listening to it makes me feel tougher than I actually am. So I gotta like be careful how much I listen to stuff like this. I'm not actually hard. I'm not gonna slaughter anyone, but I feel like it when I'm driving and listening to that song.
And honestly, if you would ask me tomorrow, I could have picked Slaughtered as my favorite song. Like so much interchangeability with like this album because there's so many, like I said, so many good tracks that I love on here. The first concert I ever saw was Black Sabbath, Pantera, and the Deftones.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it was the Black Sabbath reunion tour, February 99 at the Palace.
Wow. My first concert was Amy Grant, so I think you got me beat.
I mean, music's music, my brother.
This is true.
Pantera played Slaughtered at that show, and
Nice.
hearing it live and just, yeah, I love Slaughtered. And talking about driving around with it, at my first car, I had a stereo that cost more than my car, and Pantera pounds unbelievably on a really good stereo. The production on this album too is just so crisp, so clean. Terry Date, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he produced it.
I'm glad you looked that up. I was just thinking how I was like, oh shit, I forgot to look up who produced it. What else is he known for?
He does a lot of metal. Let's see, he did the first 4 Pantera albums.
Oh, okay, so they had a rapport.
Yeah, he did Soundgarden, Bad Motorfinger,
Oh, great album.
Astro Creep 2000, White Zombie,
Okay, so he was working in this era,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
Prong, Sir Mix-a-Lot, so he's got his hands in a lot of stuff.
That's diverse. And yeah, that makes sense. Prong and Pantera have always been kind of wedded in my mind since I was a kid. What about, is there like an underrated track on this album, either for you or that you think that like fans don't appreciate as much as they should?
Well, it's funny you mentioned 25 Years because that is my underrated track. I feel that is just one of Pantera's best tracks. It's heavy, it's emotional, it's very personal. You can feel it coming through, and it's kind of an epic structure of the song too. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of different parts to it, and it's got a groove, it's got a fast part, you know. It has all the pinpoints of a good Pantera song.
And it's set right in the center of the album. I think that's like intentional, right? Like it feels like the centerpiece of the album. It's not my favorite song on the album, but it is the one I've thought the most about the last few weeks for all the reasons that we've discussed lyrically, and also just the changes in the song, the way it progresses in like kind of some unconventional ways.
Yeah. Pantera's song structures, starting on this album and going on, got a lot more unorthodox. Just like, you're not going to hear verse, chorus, verse, outro, you know, whatever. You're not going to hear that on, you know, any Pantera album, but especially on this and going forward.
It seems like they got like a confidence in this album with their songwriting, maybe, where they're like, we're never going to end up on the top 50 or whatever, but at the same time, we have a really strong fan base, and we're like heroes of the metal scene, so we can do whatever the fuck we want by 94.
Yeah, I mean, the song Becoming is about them becoming bigger than their musical heroes.
Oh.
They were saying in interviews how they would see a lot of the bands they grew up with kind of playing by the numbers at the time. And they're just like, no, fuck that. We're Pantera. We're not going to do that. And they never did that.
That's respectable.
And then also they kind of influenced because they would tour with those bands too. And they would open for them. And if you got Pantera opening for you, and you're closing the show, you're going to have to step your game up, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
As a live act, they were insane. I saw them twice, and it was some of the best shows I've ever seen.
What was it the second time you saw them at?
Second time was Kobo, the Extreme Steel tour. I believe it was 2001, August or June. It was Pantera, Slayer, Static X, and Morbid Angel.
Okay.
That was a heavy show.
Yeah, that's like you'd walk out of that bloody, I imagine.
And Slayer opened for Pantera. They let Pantera close the tour.
Wow. I mean, Pantera, I guess, would be bigger, but Slayer are like the Godfathers.
They took a back seat, like, go get them, brothers. And Kerry King actually came out and played fucking Hostile on the every stop of the tour
That's very cool.
with Pantera.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
That sounds like a memorable show.
Oh, yeah.
Could you pick a weakest song from this album?
Without a doubt. Well, okay. If you would have asked me in like 7th grade, I would have said Planet Caravan, the Black Sabbath cover at the end. But now I really like that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's a nice palate cleanser at the end. And
exactly. And definitely it feels like they were listening to a lot of Alice in Chains at the time, but not like in a bad way, not like in a way that they're ripping them off. I just feel like it's a mood.
But now sitting with the album, going through the lyrics, hands down, it's Good Friend and a Bottle of Pills.
Like, again, I am very new to this album. I wasn't even going to say what I thought was the worst song until I heard that song. It is fucking terrible.
Yeah, and reading in an interview from Phil that it's a true story from his youth, I'm just like, that's even sicker. I'm done. Like, why is it's a dumb interlude?
Yeah.
Dimebag said on an interview, he's like, I was wasted when Vinnie Paul and Rex were doing a little exercise. I came in and just was wasted on Jack Daniels. I wasn't even hitting chords or notes. I'm just making noise. And Phil put these lyrics over it, and I don't know what the hell was going on, and all of a sudden it was on the album.
Oh my God. And it's a pretty thick album. They really didn't need to stack it.
Yeah.
They didn't need filler. And it feels like filler.
It feels like a skit or something. It could be cut and never be missed, and everyone would be happier.
Sometimes I thought you might be spying, living out some fresh fantasy, but no, you were knocked out. But we were all knocked out, you know, in a way.
Yeah, and it kind of gets it. So, again, I have kind of a touch and go relationship with metal. And the metal that I typically do like is usually stuff that Darkest Hour, Coalesce, like stuff that if I can't understand what they're saying, I'm not bothered by it. And like listening to that, I'm like, oh, this guy's a bag of shit. You know, like it's hard not to like judge whoever wrote that, which is Phil.
Yeah, and you know, Phil's one of those guys that you just wish he didn't open his mouth when he's not singing a lot of the times. Just,
or raising his fist at Dimebag Darrell's memorial concert, as the case may be.
Yep, there it is.
There it is.
And honestly, like during this album, he was hooked on heroin, hooked on painkillers.
Oh, really?
He had degenerative spine disease that he was going through, and he was not having a great time. And this maybe some sort of I don't even know. There's no good side to it. It's
Sure.
garbage.
Yeah, but the rest of the album, there's only a few points. Well, actually, the lyrics for Shedding Skin also kind of like made me go, what the fuck? But generally speaking, the rest of the album has some pretty, you know.
Yeah, I read about Phil said that was about his inability to form relationships.
Yeah, I felt like he was talking kind of to himself and not like a woman, but it's also kind of sounds like he's talking to a woman. I don't know. It's a weird song.
Kind of like the metaphor, but then he gets kind of specific and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Whereas then you have like Throes of Rejection, which is so complicated and again, like super vulnerable. I feel like the lyrics and the song are matched in a way that like you could tell like there was a lot of craft put into that one because like you can feel the guitar and everything like doing like this winding down, like I am depressed. I am like in the throes of rejection. It's really creative.
Again, with the unorthodox structure of the song too. Just starts and stops and just squeals out of nowhere that lead into another interlude. It's cool stuff.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. Do you have any specific memories tied to this album that you would want to get into for the show?
Just playing guitar and just we've been emphasizing, you know, a lot of the lyrics because it's the first time I've really got into it. But what got me into Pantera and will always like keep me into Pantera is Vinnie Paul and Dimebag. Just those two are Pantera for me. The music, the riffs, the rhythms, and Rex is a solid bass player.
For sure.
Not to not mention him, but Dimebag had a huge influence on me with the tuning. This is the first album that they were tuned down to C sharp. They were in standard tuning for the first two albums.
Oh.
C sharp is a step and a half down from standard tuning. It's known as the Sabbath tuning. And Dimebag would go on to use this for the rest of his career. I adopted this tuning because of it. And I had the Dimebag Darrell Seymour Duncan pickup in my Ibanez. I still have it. And just the way I write riffs, equal parts, I'd say Iommi, Hetfield, and Dimebag. That's just like, those guys are what made me pick up a guitar.
And you're still playing regularly? Are you in a band?
I jam with our buddy Ian periodically as a two-piece.
Cool.
We record, we switch instruments and go on and off. But I'm talking to you from my home studio at my house with my Shure 57 mic and my little Marshall amp. I got my DAW, and yeah, I'd still play guitar.
Nice. That's good. Is this one of your favorite albums of all time, or is it just one of your favorite albums of 93, 94?
All time, hands down.
Okay. I had a feeling. To have that big of an influence on you and how you create music.
Yeah.
This seems like this is part of you.
Yeah. And like a lot of people we're familiar with in pop culture come and go, pass away. But when Dimebag Darrell passed away, like I'll never forget hearing it. I'll never forget where I was. I'll never forget how I felt. It hurt a lot.
And such a tragic and
the way
stupid
he went too.
Yeah,
it
was just fucking brutal.
Completely unavoidable and not his fault.
Yeah, no, of course. It's just such a fucked up way for someone like, for anyone to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really sad. And I feel like if you're missing one or both of Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul, like, is it even Pantera anymore? Because it just really seems like those guys were the main draw.
And that's why the reformed Pantera with Charlie Bonatti from Anthrax, Rex Brown of Pantera, Philip Pantera, and Zakk Wylde, they're going out and touring as Pantera, and people are, oh, that's not Pantera, how dare you, and whatever. It's just, I see their point, but it's just like, it's for the music. Their estates have signed off on it.
That's good.
If they're good with it, why can't you? It's just, then don't come. We don't want to see you there.
That's a good point. And you know what? It makes me think of bands that we're used to thinking of as classic bands and older bands, not
that
like
are
bands
practically tribute bands.
That are practically tribute bands. Exactly. Like Lynyrd Skynyrd is not remotely what Lynyrd Skynyrd is, or Creedence Clearwater Revisited and all that kind of stuff, or Journey.
Like if you go on Wikipedia, they show like the timeline bars of like all the band members, and like you can see some of these, like they have 15 plus members that have come and gone. Through some of these bands. No. Just like some of these bands in general.
Legacy bands.
Yeah, legacy bands.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of what Pantera has become. That's cool. I mean, I don't know are they still producing new stuff?
No. Well, they've been talk of them producing new music not under the Pantera name.
Okay. Well, that sounds, that's interesting, because then like how you're going to tour, but it sounds like they have a really good sense of what they're doing then. Because I know, all right, it sounds to me, you tell me, there was definite friction between Anselmo and the Abbott brothers, though, right? Like that was like things went to shit between them, or am I wrong?
No, you're right. That's one of the main reasons for Pantera's breakup. Pretty much after 9/11.
Oh,
they never came back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they went their separate ways, and then in interviews, Phil started spouting off.
Right.
Because he was in a bunch of other bands at the time,
Yeah.
like doing all of his other side projects, and the relationship deteriorated between Phil and the Abbott brothers, and they never reunited.
Well, it is good that if you want to see them now, even though like some of the key members are gone, that you can at least see them, and it's probably fun, which is cool.
I mean, and I get why people are upset, because Vinnie Paul and Dimebag are huge shoes to fill.
Yeah, and people could be, like, including myself, can be pretty precious about the bands that they hold most dearly, and I know that Pantera's fan base is really devoted.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a point where you set this album down, or is this one of those ones that you return to on a near weekly basis?
I wouldn't say weekly, but there's never been more than a few months, I'd say, where I don't listen to this album or any number of Pantera's amazing albums that I love.
And this is one of the go-to.
Especially, this is my favorite Pantera album and one of my favorite albums of all time. And it's never far from reach for me. And, Dimebag also caused me to like go back and, because in a lot of the Guitar World interviews, he would talk about Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads, and go back and I would listen to their stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a huge Kiss fan, and I'm not a big Kiss guy, but like I can look at it through his eyes, I guess, and like see what he saw. I mean, he was such a big Van Halen fan. He's actually buried with the guitar from the Van Halen 2 album cover.
Oh, really?
Van Halen put it in his coffin. His Kiss coffin. He's buried in a Kiss coffin.
Yeah, I did read that. That sounds appropriate.
Forgot to mention the charting of this album.
Oh.
Do you know what it debuted at?
No, I don't.
Debuted April of 94 on the Billboard Top 200. The album debuted number 1.
Number 1?
Billboard Top 200, number 1. Probably
Holy
the
shit.
heaviest album of all time, I would say, to debut number 1.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I would never have guessed that. I would have been impressed if they broke the top 10.
Do you want to hear the top 5?
I do.
I got them right here.
I do.
Okay. So starting at 5, we got Live at the Acropolis by Yanni.
Okay.
Number 4, we have Above the Rim soundtrack.
Okay.
Number 3, we have The Sign by Ace of Base. Number 2, we have Longing in Their Hearts by Bonnie Raitt. And number 1, Pantera, Far Beyond Driven.
Those albums didn't all come out at the same time, though, right?
Yeah, this is
Holy shit.
Well,
because Ace of Base really got big.
well, actually, Ace of Base had been on the charts for 18 weeks. at that
Oh,
point.
okay. I was going to say, because I remember like I Saw the Sign was like inescapable for a
Yeah.
month or two, but still that's really impressive. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because that says absolutely volumes about Pantera, not just as like a metal band, but as an American band that gets to your point about them being not maybe as appropriately appreciated and valued as maybe they should be in terms of influence that they had in the late 90s.
Number 1 spot, that's primarily word of mouth. They had a couple videos on MTV like Walk and Cowboys from it, but
Yeah.
they weren't played in heavy rotation at all.
I think the only single from this album that I remember was 5 Minutes Alone, right?
Singles from this album were I'm Broken, Planet Caravan, 5 Minutes Alone, and Becoming.
5 Minutes Alone is funny because like it's really, really tough sounding. And he's like, I'm asking, please. I'm asking you, please. Please, please. I'm like, that doesn't really come off very tough guy, but he is talking about kicking someone's ass, I guess.
Well, did you read the origins of the song?
It's like he like got into some sort of scrape with someone's son, so the dad wrote them a letter, right?
Yeah, the son was at the Pantera show, flipped off Pantera. Pantera stopped the show, flipped him off, and everyone else in the audience flipped him off. And then people in the audience beat the man up, and the man's father sued Pantera and asked Pantera's manager for 5 minutes alone with Phil.
like that's gonna happen.
Yeah, and Pantera's manager said you don't want 5 minutes alone with Phil and hung up on him.
Yeah.
I probably agree with the manager. But yeah, the 5 minutes alone is a quote from the boy's father.
That's pretty funny. And he must have said please because it sounds like maybe it's a direct quote.
Yeah, that is pretty funny. I never thought of that. And Phil's yelling it.
Right.
Please and thank you. Cry for compensation. I ask you, please just give us 5 minutes alone. Just give us 5 minutes alone.
What about as far as to wrap up this interview? What's the song you want to go out on?
Play me off with I'm Broken.
Okay.
Because that riff is just such an earworm, and it's an amazing riff that Dimebag actually came up with at Soundcheck.
Cool.
And it's instantly one of their biggest songs. And I really dig it, and everyone else is going to dig it too because it's going to be in their ear all day. So.
It's a good one to end on then. Cool.
Yep.
Good. Sometimes I'll ask who you think the MVP of the album is, but it sounds like you think it's Dimebag Darrell. Am I right?
Dimebag is definitely the MVP of this album. The riffs will always be king for Dimebag and for me, and his riffs are up there with the best of them.
I mean, it's an impressive album, but I'm trying to imagine this without him. And it just, would we be talking about it now? Probably not.
No, Vinnie Paul and Dimebag
Yeah.
are definitely Pantera, but Dimebag, his riffs is the signature of Pantera.
And he's the main songwriter, right?
Yeah.
That says everything. Anything else you wanted to say about Pantera or this album before we move on to some other stuff?
The only other thing I had is just the similarity between Vinnie Paul and Dimebag and Eddie Van Halen and Alex Van Halen. Just how they kind of play off each other in the same ways, and how Van Halen brothers were such a big influence on the Abbott brothers, and you can hear it like in the way they play and the tone, Dimebag's tone.
Yeah. That's a super obvious comparison that did not occur to me at all. I'm glad you made it.
I was reading his Dimebag's Guitar World interview when this album came out. And he said he triple tracked through 3 amps each guitar channel.
Wow.
And I think there's probably at least 3 guitar channels. So at any given time, you're hearing like 9 guitars.
Fatten it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Are you listening to anything else lately?
Well, everyone who knows me, the new Metallica album, 72 Seasons.
Okay.
I've been digesting it pretty heavily since it came out last month, and I think it's some of their best work. And I encourage people to check it out.
Whenever a band is grinding out albums for decades and then they release something really late in their career that makes the fans like sit up and pay attention, that's rare, and that's very awesome when that happens. I'll have to check that out. I'm not a huge Metallica fan, but if you are and you say that that's standout, I'll at least give it a listen.
And people take it with a grain of salt because I am a massive Metallica fanboy, sure. But yes, it's some of their best work, I think.
Right on. Great. All right. So my last question for you is about the 90s. Now, you are a longtime guitar player, so you're not requiring, you brought it up a couple times, Guitar World or anything like that anymore. But when we were kids, right? Like, I don't know about you, but all my guitar playing was completely dependent on whatever 5 songs these guitar magazines would have tabulated for me to figure out.
Oh, yeah. They would have like usually a song by whoever the feature cover artist was, and then just a couple other random ones. And it's like, it looks like I'm learning Sweet Home Alabama today.
Right. I remember like learning songs I didn't even really know that well and be like, well, I'll just kind of do my own rhythm because I don't really even know what it's supposed to sound like.
And also Dimebag had a article in the back by the songs in the Guitar World magazine. And also like at one point Angus Young did and Kerry King did.
Very cool.
And they would print tablature of just like a riff of a song. So sometimes you would just get a riff of one of your favorite songs. Then you would just have to like figure the rest out if you didn't have the tablature or like access to it.
Which, yeah, that was always way beyond my ability. I'd like look at those and be like, well, that's for someone else who's not me. I was always more of a rhythm player.
Oh yeah, me too. Leads always kind of felt like homework to me. And that's, another way Dimebag influenced me was just, it's all about the riff, like that's what sticks in my head is down, 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 down. Right.
Which one of these songs on this album, I forget which one, really is coming heavily from that exact riff. Right?
Yeah, that's I'm Broken.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Yeah. It's a great riff. Very Led Zeppelin-y, but good.
Yep.
So here's my question for you, I guess. There's a lot of guitar magazines from the era. Do you have a favorite? There was Guitar School, there was Guitar Magazine, there was Guitar World, and I'm trying to remember what other ones. Guitar Buyer's Guide, I guess, was another one. Which one was your go-to?
For me, it was Guitar World, and then if I couldn't get Guitar World or like whatever the artist wasn't digging on the cover or whatever, I would go to Guitar Player magazine.
Yeah.
It's a cheap knockoff.
Yeah, I feel like Guitar World was the main one, and that would always have like Stone Temple Pilots or something else cool, and then there'd be like stuff on there also. You're like, sometimes you'd be like, all right, I'm not going to buy this month, and maybe I'll go to.
Yeah, for guitar in the 90s, for me, it was Guitar World all day. Sometimes Guitar Player, but for info, a lot of times, honestly, it was Metal Edge and Hit Parader.
Okay, I don't remember Metal Edge. Hit Parade, I remember, but
they might have been bi-weekly or month. Like they came out pretty regularly.
Oh, really?
So that's how I would stay up to date on a lot of, with those magazines.
That shit was so necessary before the internet, man. Like you just kind of like randomly buy stuff because some magazine you trusted would review it and you'd be like, all right.
Or you would discover stuff, like I said, through t-shirts. You would see someone's older brother or some kid walking the hallway at the school. Like, oh, what's that shirt? What's that band?
And of course, also that was how I made a lot of friends too. Like if someone was wearing a shirt that I do, I'd be like, oh, well, you listen to whoever, and now we're going to be friends for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, like that was how you. Oh, hey, you're wearing this shirt. Nowadays, they sell Slayer shirts at Myers, so it's not
literally, which is bizarre. Yeah,
and I bought one, and it's great, and I love it.
Yeah, no complaints. I mean, I guess it's easy accessibility there, but it's weird.
If you see someone wearing one, they're not necessarily going to know every track to Raining Blood, and that's okay.
That's all right. They've become, again, like classic bands, as Pantera has become.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, man, for coming on here. I think it's important that I make sure that I get some metal perspective on this show, and I really appreciate you volunteering to do that for us.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, and I really dig the podcast. I've been going through the episodes, and my favorite so far has been the Recipe for Hate episode.
Oh, awesome. Well, I appreciate you listening, man, for sure. Well, thanks again for coming on.
I think we wrapped up pretty good.
Yeah, I think I do. I'd like to give another big thank you to Brandon Callahan for coming on the show and talking about Pantera with me. I recognize that Pantera is an important band. I just fell off with them, so I definitely appreciate his perspective. He's going to come back on. He's going to be talking about an album released in 1993 from another metal band that replaced their singer that year. Kind of a controversial album in a way, I guess, for that reason. So keep an eye out for that. And if you want to come on the show, you'd be very welcome. Another album from the 93-94 era that I was not super into, but I recognize its importance culturally. So I'd love someone to come on who does love it, is the album Smash from The Offspring. Maybe you're a fan of that album. Come on and do it. Write me at 9394podcast@gmail.com or find me on whatever social medias, and whatever album you want to talk about. That'd be great. So, okay. Yeah. I'm just going to abruptly stop again like usual because I just kind of go until I stop, until I run out of steam. So I guess I'm out of steam. Thanks. A music podcast with Travis Roy is a labor of love. It is not and never will be monetized. Please don't sue.